Oh man, that music gets me every single time. Shout out to Chris Gard Morbikai. But gentlemen, welcome to Man's Hour. I'm joined by two gentlemen of power, and we're here to talk about one of our favorite traditions and one of the most basic traditions of all mankind itself. We're here to talk about fishing. I'm joined by Mr. Prudentialist. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Cool, cool. And we're also joined by Time Stealer. How are you, sir?
I'm good, thank you. I feel like my testosterone has gone up by a few points just from listening to that intro music. So
Good, good. It should. Awesome. That's exactly the vibe we're going for. But thanks for being here, gents. So we're here to talk about fishing. So right at the very top and the start of it here, I wanted to start basically with, how'd you guys get into fishing in the first place? Do you have any, memories of the first time you were taking fishing, the first fish you caught, anything like that? Who wants to go first?
I'll
go for it. Well, sure, I'll go ahead. I got lucky. I mean, my dad is a very outdoorsy guy, so growing up, it was just the outdoors were just part of the lifestyle that we lived, no matter where we lived, whether it was the desert, the middle of nowhere, or even say on the East Coast. And that's really where a lot of my fishing memories will come from. Is that while my dad was in DC, in like the early aughts, I just remember as a kid always being taken to these lakes for fishing competitions and things like that, really getting to appreciate, both the use of live bait, but, various types of lures and freshwater fishing. And I think I was like 6 or 5 years old. I think it was like Lake Mead or something. And just out with my dad or outside of Fort Meade. I can't remember which lake it was at, but they had these competitions and people would just flood all over. And little 5-year-old me has this like little, plastic trophy somewhere that just talks about having like the smallest fish on record being caught there. So that's one of my earliest memories, just something that, my dad instilled in me and I still do it to this day.
Yeah, very, very cool. Time Stealer, what about you, man?
Fairly similar, really. In the sort of the working class communities of the north of England, fishing is an extremely popular recreational sport. My dad is, I probably got into it because of my dad, primarily. He loves his, much like Prudentialist, really, what you would call an outdoorsman. He loves what we would call field sports, hunting, shooting, fishing. He used to keep ferrets. We used to go rabbit hunting with ferrets. We used to go fishing, all sorts of stuff. Even like his dad as well. And even on my mum's side, my uncle and my granddad on that side fished as well. So it's kind of inevitable, really, that I'd end up fishing, and mostly freshwater fishing, coarse fishing, as we call it here, fishing on the canal for roach and bream. My dad likes his pike fishing, so we did a bit of lure fishing for pike as well. And as you get older, you sort of get bought the fishing books for Christmas and stuff, and that broadens your horizons. You want to try new techniques and catching different types of fish. And it also sort of escalates and spirals out of control from there, really.
Yeah, it absolutely is addicting, to put it lightly. All these outdoor sports, whether it's hunting or fishing, pretty much when you dip your toes in it, you just want to stick with it for forever. For myself, pretty much in the same boat as you guys. My dad was an outdoorsy kind of guy, and I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, and I got taken to a pond not too far away from my house, and I had just a little simple little kids rod and reel, and with a little bobber and all the fun stuff, and just throwing it in this seaweed infested pond, getting caught all the time. But eventually a little bluegill got on the line and I reeled it in, and I was just so excited. I'm like, all right, I'm doing this for forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It absolutely is addicting, and it's very interesting that we all mentioned like fathers in that as well. It truly is fishing is time honored tradition between fathers and sons, brothers, uncles, grandfathers. It's a very manly activity. Have you guys ever been on like a fishing camp or a fishing trip with a bunch of your friends or family members, and it's just like a masculine space? Have you guys ever done something like that?
Yeah, every time that we'd come back from overseas to visit family, it was something that we would always arrange as a trip to the lake with my uncles and cousins, and it's just sort of like the masculine family get together of just casting lines, and if we wanted to like get out on a boat and just go in the middle of of the lake and just enjoy our time out there for hours and hours on night, maybe not getting home until like 2 o'clock in the morning, just because we're out there having a good time. It's really just the family. So, like you said, Red Hawk, it's really a family thing.
Yeah, very much so. What about you, Time Stealer? Have you been to one of these group fishing trips?
Not so much a group fishing trip, but whenever, like, when I was younger, we didn't necessarily have a huge amount of money, so we couldn't afford to go on foreign holidays, really. I know to Americans that's a bit strange because you don't tend to leave the country so much because it's so fucking big. But here, most people go on holiday in places in Europe, etc. So, but we always used to go to Scotland, which suited me. I think we'd go with my mum, my dad, my sister, my little sister. But it suited me and my dad fine because it's pike fishing central. So, you know, we would rent a cottage for a week or two, and my mum and my sister would do cringe girl stuff at the cottage, and me and my dad would go out in the evening after dinner, and we'd just go lure fishing for pike, have our waders on. You just wander around some loch, and in Scotland, like it's not like in England. In Scotland, you can basically fish pretty much wherever you want, really. At least for coarse fish like pike, and so we just chuck lures, and it doesn't get dark in the UK in the middle of summer until sort of between 9 and 10. So it's amazing just being there as the light's going down, and we just stay like for as long as we could until the sun had basically gone down, and you just got the last bit of light until you're practically fishing by feel because you can barely even see the lure anymore. And it's always just you and your dad, and there's this vast expanse of water, you know, a loch as they called them in Scotland. And it was always. I still got some pictures somewhere. I think my mum's probably got them. Mum and dad's house, and like fish, the big pike that I'd caught when I was a lad. And it's you never forget that. You never forget that sort of stuff. You never really forget just being out there, sort of just you and your old man against nature, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if you're just there with a family member, your father, grandfather, brother, whatever it is, you can even just stand there in complete silence, whether you're on a boat or you're fishing from the shore. And it really just is the best way I could describe any, outdoorsy kind of sport like this, like fishing and hunting, is it truly is a spiritual experience, in my, from my point of view of these things. All the problems of everyday life just completely slip away, and it's just a way for you to completely relax and unwind, and you just pay attention to nothing more than your rod. And it's a good way to just calm your mind because you're just focusing on this, the feelings of your line, the feelings of your rod, and it's just a fantastic way of calming the mind.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's kind of interesting. Fishing has a challenge aspect to it as well. And you're not just sort of challenging against the fish. Obviously there's also fishing matches, competitions. Match fishing is huge in England, particularly in the north of England. But even just like casual sort of competitions, I always remember that it's something that at the time I didn't realize, but in retrospect, there was, I don't know if you lads experienced this, but there's always this sort of slight underlying tone of like father-son competition going on with fishing, which I think is great because young men these days, lads these days, they're not particularly competitive because, I'm sure Red Hawk could speak for an hour as to why that is, but I think we all really know why that is. And I remember, like when we used to go fishing, if I get in the tangle, my dad would say, you've got to figure it out yourself. He wouldn't sort it for me. And I used to hate him for it at the time. I used to really resent him for it. But then as I got older, I kind of realized why that was. And I think that's part of maybe why I am quite a bit of a problem solver these days. And I can sit down and figure stuff out. And I remember there was those times where as I got older, there was a bit of a sort of Darth Vader moment where the apprentice became the master, and I kind of outstripped my dad in fishing ability, really. And it's kind of like that friendly, natural competition that you get as you mature into a man from a boy. And I think that's just one of those other things that you can get in fishing and it's difficult to really do that anywhere else in the modern world because of the nature of the world we live in. And I think it's just another brilliant thing about fishing. And I'm always glad when I see, you know, like teenagers and boys out fishing, which you do fairly regularly here. I'm glad they're still doing it, because it has so much to offer young men.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up feeling the same way, you know, kind of getting resentful for being told to do it on your own, or to endure it and suck it up and do whatever it is. Because, you know, my dad and I, we did all the scouting stuff together. So it was just, you know, all the hiking, all the requirements of what you needed to do physical activity wise, camping, the outdoors. And, you know, learning that stuff, you know, when you're younger, like, you know, 12, 13, 14, you kind of resent all the stuff that you're being forced to do. You know, you have a life
Mhm.
that you want to live and experience, but, you know, you get older and you get into your, like, you know, mid to late 20s, and then you really like look back and appreciate every single thing that your dad has taught you and is done. And it's just a real pleasure and delight knowing that even the most basic things, right, like getting your lure tied to the line, or how to, you know, get in a new line in, and things like line memory for in organizing your tackle box and all that stuff, just things that you would find to be like inane, or just sort of that teenage, you know, blow off your dad bit. But you get older and you just really realize the importance of all the lessons that your dad ever gave you, whether it's with the outdoors or just in life. And I think that fishing is like one of the last few spaces where it really is just father and sons, because you can just be out there for hours on end, whether it's at a pond, lake, or in a boat, and you don't have to say a word, but you know that this is a memory that both you and your old man are gonna like remember for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the wonderful things about fishing as compared to another outdoor recreational sport like hunting or hiking or something is that it's not as physically taxing and demanding. So it quite literally is something you can start at, you know, age 5 and go all the way up to, you know, your age 80, you know, and still consistently go out and enjoy, you know, the great outdoors with, you know, your loved ones and things like that. So I highly recommend any young man get into it for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. Especially young men in these sort of circles. I know it's a bit of a meme, but there is a distinct lack of grass touching, and in my experience, women tend to find it quite attractive if you're able to, you know, actually go outside and touch grass and show competency in something like fishing. I don't know whether it's some sort of inbuilt genetic thing that women have, or whether they're just not used to that so much anymore. It always seems to, whether they'd like to admit it or not, it always tends to subconsciously tick something in their brain, I feel.
Yeah, women just like you know, men who have things going on, men who are interesting,
Yeah.
who have like other hobbies outside of themselves. You know,
Mhm.
I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this. Have you ever tried to take a girl fishing with you before?
I threatened to take Mrs. Time Stealer fishing, and she's a bit reluctant. But I just don't think women get it. Really, they don't. It's
Yeah, it's not something that I've bothered to try doing for a
no.
date idea. This is, I also consider it just like my space.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
if I'm like married and I have kids, then maybe it can be a family thing. But like right now, if like this is my place where I can escape for, you know, 6 hours if I wanted to on a weekend, and just be absolutely content all by myself with just my rod and line, waiting for the bite to come in. You know, it's not a place that I would expect to take a girl on a date or to show her off. But you know, at the same time, right? There's some women that are like, well, if you have a you know, you and a fish on your profile picture, I'm done. And it's just like, no, you want those people. You want the outdoorsy guy.
Yeah, yeah. I have taken women on you know, foolishly in the past. I'd taken them on dates before you know, out fishing, and of course, none of them enjoyed it. I did have one girl, you know, one of my recent ones, maybe a year or two back, who was more outdoorsy, and you know, she was into it in the sense of like she'd done it before, and I feel like that's the healthier way to do this if you know, you are going to go down that route. But at this point, it's not something I'm interested in, like, you know, reeling somebody into, for lack of a better word, you know, unless they're really, really interested, and then you go out and take it. But no, I definitely find it more as a, you know, a masculine, you know, my own space, you know, kind of activity and hobby of mine as well. But back on the subject of, you know, fishing with our fathers and everything. I don't know if this is something that you guys ever observed, but I learned a lot about just male interaction by being in these kinds of groups of guys when they're out fishing. Like I would go with my dad and my grandfather, and my dad had two brothers, and I had a bunch of male cousins. And when all of us would either be on the boat or we'd all be at like a campfire next to the river or something like that, you definitely picked up a lot about how like men talk to each other and like a hierarchy and stuff. Like the old men would always sit around drinking their beers, and the older guy, like the grandfather, would order his sons about, and then our dads would order us about to go and do something like that. And you just kind of pick up on the kind of like a hard work almost kind of attitude. I don't know if you guys have observed that.
I'm not so much sure about sort of ordering about, because that's more of the sort of the American fishing trip style of thing. But one thing that I've definitely observed is that it's one of the few areas of modern life where there is a lot of respect for elders in that community. Like, because I think maybe it is because it's not so physically demanding. And it is just one of those things where there's no substitute for just experience. And obviously they've had the most time to get out there on the bank and fish. And like, I'm always talking to like, sometimes I just go for a walk down the canal, might take a lure rod, and I see some of like the old match anglers who used to fish on the same canal, like back going into like the 70s. And I'll just pick the brains. I've picked up so much from them. And they're always willing to share their little stuff, so that little things they've learned the hard way over the years. And I just like that, because I always have, a lot of time for older generations. I know we sort of go on about the boomers and stuff, but you can still learn a lot of stuff from them because they've learned stuff the hard way in that respect. And so I do quite like that. I think that there is a bit of a lack of respect for older generations, even in supposedly sort of more right-wing traditionalist communities. So I kind of like that about fishing. You can it doesn't really matter what age you are. You've all got that, and you can all learn from each other and pick stuff up. And it's almost like a common language that crosses whatever generation you're in.
Yeah, and I think that's why also like fishing is such an important, tradition, hobby, whatever you want to call it, for guys in our circles to preserve, because it really is one of the rare spaces left where you actually do have a connection through the generations, like that. You have, the young and the old and the middle-aged all working together with a common goal. And the other thing about fishing, which I find different to hunting in this regard, is that fishing has a much higher skill cap, in the sense of you could be picking up, new skills all the time, for depending on the kind of fish, depending on the kind of stream or river or deep sea or whatever it is, there's, always something new that you could be picking up. So it kind of fulfills the sense of accomplishment, and leveling up your skills, in the male brain.
Oh yeah. It's especially fishing in the UK is almost like endless in terms of the different types of locations and the baits and the different species of fish and the ways to catch them, and it's practically infinite. And every water that you fish has its own character. And people think I'm crazy when I tell them this, but it really is. It's like one river, it can just behave. The fish in there can behave so differently to fish of the same species in another river, and if you it's almost like starting from scratch. Sometimes you just have to relearn stuff, and you talk to people who've spent like their entire lives fishing that river, and they know it like the back of their hand, and it's just incredible, really, like how the depth of it as a skill.
Yeah, and I mean, here in America, it's also a place for it has that quasi like spiritual church experience, because here in America things are just a little more commercialized. So, any sort of sporting goods store that does have a heavy emphasis on fishing or hunting, whether, even places like Gander Mountain, Bass Pro Shop especially, or Cabela's, it's just a place for men of all ages to find someone asking a question and then like guide them to what they might need to get started, or to, swap stories or tips and tricks. If someone says, hey, I'm going to this place, well, like, hey, at this lake, be careful for X, Y, and Z or whatever. And you're absolutely right, though, when you say that the water has a different, the fish and what, even if they're the same species, will have a different character. Like, if you want to go fishing on the Red River, sure, you're going to catch a lot of the things that you might find at Lake Ray Roberts, but those are two entirely different beasts to manage. And you're always going to learn from someone, like you said, those old men that have been fishing there for decades. It's just really a place where, helpful knowledge, especially if you like keep your fish to catch and eat, that it's just going to help you out in the long run. And it's a place where old men are really happy to have people to talk to. I've noticed that a lot these days, that, old men just, they have so much information that they want to pass down and pass along. And whether or not they had kids or their kids don't want to be involved in their lives anymore and just want to ship them off to a home, those guys, if you get the chance, especially if you're out there just fishing, listen to them talk, because you never know what kind of cool story or piece of history that you're going to walk away from. Some of the most interesting people I've ever met, I've only met once because I went out fishing.
Yeah, absolutely the case. So do you guys have we talked about like the first time you ever went fishing, like the first stories coming out in your mind. Do you guys have like everyone's got one, a special moment, like, almost like, Captain Ahab, or, something like that? Do you have like a good moment of, that you were really, really proud of yourself, like whether maybe it was like one of the biggest fish you ever caught, or a certain species of fish you'd never seen before, or something like that? Do you guys have a Moby Dick moment?
I have a couple of stories like that, probably. One was when I must have been about 12 or 13, which I think that's the point in the angler's life where you start to really get into it quite often. And I'd bought, it was in November. It was around the time of my birthday in November, and I'd got given a feeder fishing rod for Christmas. I don't really think this is something you do in America. You sort of a rod where the tip is very sensitive. And
like an ultralight or something like that?
No. Basically, what you do is you cast out with either a weight and like a hook on the end, or we have what these things called feeders, where you can put like some ground bait and some sort of chopped up worms or maggots and stuff in that to attract the fish in. And you've got a baited hook, and you sort of cast it out, and you put it at like 90-degree angle to where you've cast out. So you put it sort of parallel to the bank. And when the fish bites, the little coloured tip will quiver because there's a fish on the end.
I have seen this actually. Yeah, now that you're mentioning this.
And so it's something that you do a lot to catch a fish called bream, especially. We have sort of freshwater bream here as well as sea bream. And my dad, we went fishing on the canal here, the Lancaster Canal here in Lancashire. Legendarily difficult place to fish. It's actually not so difficult these days. Well, it's still tricky, but back then it was really hard. And I'd read all in the fishing magazines about different ground bait and baits and stuff, and I mixed up my ground bait. And I did some chopped worms, got some maggots, put some molasses in the ground bait because they really like sweet flavors, bream. And it was bitterly cold. It must have been towards the end of November. It was bitterly cold. It was windy. We made the mistake of going somewhere where there was a lot of trees. So there was leaves falling everywhere. There was a lot of leaves on the canal. The bottom of the canal, and I was catching my hook on those. And like my dad, he's just like thinking this is a complete waste of time. There's no way he's gonna catch, like, might catch the odd little roach or something, but there's no way like he's gonna catch a bream, because I don't think he'd ever caught a bream when he was fishing on the canal as a lad. And it was bitterly cold, and it was getting to the point where it was so cold that I was beginning to hallucinate a little bit. Which I don't know if you ever experienced that, where it gets so cold, and I was focused so hard on the tip of the rod that you start to see things, right? And you start to imagine the tip of the rod moving when it's not actually moving. And a couple of times I struck and there was nothing there. And now whether I missed the bite or whether I was hallucinating, imagining it, I don't know. But eventually, one time I struck and I just feel the weight on the end, and the rod bends round. And my dad was like, oh, it's probably just like a bit of a log or something, a bit of a tree branch on the end. having a reel in, and this bream just like, it wasn't even a huge fish. It was probably only about 3 or 4 pounds, and I've caught God knows how many fish like that since from the canal. But when it came up, it looked like the biggest fish in the world, and this sort of bronze, like they're shaped like dinner plates. They're thin, and they've got this really sort of round oval body. It's like a fucking dinner plate comes up, and my dad was like, "Bloody hell, just get that in the net quick!" And we got it out on the bank, and he couldn't believe it. He could not believe it, and we just sort of sat there for like 30 seconds looking at it, and he goes, "What did he say?" He said, "Well, I'll take my hat off to you." He said, "I'll take my hat off to you, Time Stealer." He said my real name. And yeah, and I think, you know, when we said about competition, father-son competition, I think that was the point where like I felt like I'd kind of started to surpass my dad, you know, and I'd earned his respect, you know, as an angler. That was the first fish I caught on that rod as well. The first bream I'd had from the canal. Not easy conditions, very harsh conditions on a difficult place. And it was just an achievement that I will remember for the rest of my life, really. Yeah, like that.
Yeah. Interesting. Oh man, yeah, those kinds of stories like that where you just talking about rubbing it in like the old guy's face, like, oh, I'll show you, I'll catch this fish, for sure. Yeah, we've definitely all had experiences like that for sure. What about you, Prudentialist? Do you have a big fishing moment that sticks out to you in your head?
I've got a couple. I remember being probably like around 12 or 13. We had visited back home, and we were off at the lake, and we had quite a bit of success casting deep, going for catfish, getting late into the evening, and just this like 30-minute wrestle and trying to reel in this what ended up being a 20-pound catfish. And I didn't get any assistance. This was one of those moments where Dad was just like, "All right, this is your moment, and go for it." And it turned into quite a lengthy struggle for a much shorter and skinnier me at the time, going just fighting this thing for about half an hour until finally getting a chance to bring it to the surface and pull him up. And I've got the picture of it somewhere with my dad, but being able to do something like that all on your own and succeed was definitely one of those moments. And then a more recent one that kind of just caught me by surprise was that, for those of you who know my channel, I do a lot of fishing videos where I just do some impromptu off the cuff, remarks on some culture and politics. But a while back, I had learned that the pond that we fish out of here on the land actually has catfish in it. Because normally you'd get like crappie or smallmouth bass, and you can see the sunfish if you wanted to feed them or whatever. But lo and behold, there's catfish in there, and it just was a really pleasant surprise that you learn something new every day about this place that you go to all the time to fish at. But those are just some of my more recent memories that I can think of or think off the top of my head. It's just those moments of the struggle that it's all like a rite of passage. Like, you're not getting any help. It's just you have become the man now.
Yeah, for sure. What species of catfish was it? Like a channel catfish or
yeah, channel catfish.
Yeah, they could definitely get pretty big in certain areas for sure. I've got so a lot of the fishing that I've done up here, I'm in the Great Lakes region, so I did a lot of fishing on the Great Lakes growing up or out here, and we'd always go out fishing for smallmouth bass, and we'd use little spot tail live spot tail minnows, and just hook them right through the lips, and then go out on the boat and maybe 6 to 8 feet of water, just out in the middle of these massive lakes, which might as well be shallow seas just because of how massive they are. But we're out there catching for smallmouth bass, and this exact circumstances happened to me at least 3 times because I'd be going out there all the time doing this, and I get a little maybe 2.5, 3 pound smallmouth bass comes up and eats my minnow, and I'm pulling it in, and then all of a sudden a muskie comes swimming out of the water and swallows my bass. So now I've got a pretty much like a chain reaction of fish basically, and you're reeling them into the boat. And once I got the muskie into the boat, the other 2 times the muskie had spit out the bass, but the 3rd time I did manage to get him into the boat, and that was something, because you're thinking your rod's going to snap because you're just you're using just a basic bait caster rod and everything, and the line is not designed to be holding a 18, 19 pound muskie. but they stuck on, and it's very, very interesting. There's always a bigger fish, to from episode 1 of Star Wars.
Yeah, there's always a bigger fish. I'd love
Yeah.
to catch a muskie. As I said, we do pike fishing here. That's something I'm into. And a muskie, from what I can tell, is basically just like a pike on steroids. I'd love to catch one of those one day. We don't have them here, but I would, yeah, that would be the size those things can grow to, like 60 pounds or so, from what I can gather. It's immense.
Yeah, they could definitely get they can get pretty big, for sure. Yeah, they're aggressive fish, but and they got some serious teeth on them, and they definitely don't screw around. But they're it's very interesting, like how you actually go out and catch them on the Great Lakes. You basically will have you're basically like deep sea fishing. Essentially, is how it is. You basically have 5 rods hanging off the back of the boat, and you just go trolling around and just hoping for one of them to come up and bite one of the baits. But have you guys done any deep sea fishing at all, or are you just mostly freshwater?
Mostly
fresh water.
Yeah. Deep sea fishing is a totally different animal, for sure. And I think that's also, it's kind of like the almost like leveling up to the you almost like have like your training wheels like in the freshwater when you're growing up, and then you move on to like like an actual stream when you're catching like salmon or trout or something, like you're actually fast moving water, and then you can like get into lakes. And then when you get into like ocean fishing, like when you're off the beach or something, that's very similar to like freshwater in the same way everything behaves. And then when you actually get out into the deep sea fishing when you're miles offshore, that's a totally different animal for sure. Last time I went was maybe 6 or 7 years ago now. It was on Labor Day. I was down in the Florida Keys, and we were doing we were fishing for sailfish, and I did manage to hook one and reel it in. It was about a 10-minute fight, and that was amazing. That was definitely probably I was so ecstatic because we were out there searching for dolphin fish dorado, just for some dinner. And one of the guides, on this fishing charter, just looked out and saw, a group of sailfish that were around. And it's very odd that you see them in that part of Florida in September. And we ended up getting 4 guys on the boat, each caught a sailfish one after the other, which is absolutely wild. I was ecstatic. There's a picture of me with like the biggest grin on my face when I finally get this thing in the boat. It was nuts.
Based.
Yeah, based indeed.
Yeah.
That brings up an interesting question. Like, for lack of a better word, I'd almost like call it like a fishing passport, as it were. Whenever you get into like a sport like this for such a long time, you have like this idea of like this dream fish you'd like to catch, or fishing trip or something like that you'd love to take. If money wasn't an option or anything like that. Do you guys have anything like that you'd really like to do? Is there a certain species of fish that you'd really, really love to catch?
Like I said, the muskellunge, pike fishing is really big here in the north of England and in Scotland, and so yeah, I'd love to go to sort of Minnesota and those sort of places, Canada, just catch a muskie. I've never been to America either. I want to go at some point. Yeah, that's probably the one for me. Although I wouldn't mind catching a barramundi in Australia as well. That would be pretty cool. But probably muskies. That's probably the top of my list, I think.
Yeah.
If money weren't an option, I'd love to go to a different part of the world and try my hand at fishing there. I'd love to go on a trip for like Japanese sea bass, or really any sort of just Pacific Ocean deep sea fishing. Just because I've never had the opportunity. I mean, I would love to probably more realistically just go down to like Galveston Island in Texas and just do a little bit of saltwater fishing. But I mean, an international trip, no holds bar, it'd probably be someplace off in the Pacific near Japan, or try some Alaskan fishing trips.
Yeah, all those would be really, really cool. I mean, you could really find yourself going down like a rabbit hole with this kind of thought process. I mean, I know personally for me, because hunting is more my thing, even though I really enjoy fishing. I mean, I have pages of like journal notes and things I would take, back when I was working more of a corporate job. and I would just be sitting there clock watching all the time. I'd have like a little journal that I would keep, and I would just do endless hours of like research about like, oh, the kinds of big game I'd like to shoot one day. But for fishing, I'd really love to go down to somewhere in Central America, like Panama and Costa Rica, and do like tarpon fishing down there.
Yeah.
I would love to catch like a really big tarpon. That would be really, really cool. I mean, they're very notorious for being, extreme fighting fish, and that would be, a once in a lifetime dream for sure, but we'll see if we can all get there one day. Maybe we'll all take a dissident right fishing trip, somewhere around the world. uh, one of the topics that we haven't discussed yet, but which is also, extremely important and also ties into, other topics in our, sphere and everything like that is, not just catching your fish, but also cooking it and eating it as well. And that's another way where you get like kind of connection through the ages and everything like that. I know for me personally, whenever we would go out and we'd be catching, perch when it was perch season, or even when we grab like a smallmouth bass or something like that, we'd take it home and grandma would, pan fry, the perch or bass or something like that, so I think that's another thing. I mean, there's just nothing else like, fresh caught wild fish or wild game. It really puts into perspective how completely screwed our, food processing is, especially here in America.
Yeah, I can relate to that more on the hunting side than I do fishing. Like nothing has ever matched the taste of, something that you have caught or hunted down, especially like with venison. There's, as much as I love red meat and ground beef to death, but like there's nothing like a venison steak, knowing that is the animal that you had taken out and hunted and took all the work in to bring it and have it sent off to a butcher to do it yourself is even a greater accomplishment. I really do think that that's something that more people should have with the skill. I mean, America has that recreational bit that I get some shit for because for the pond that I live on, right, I do a lot of catch and release. But if I'm at the lakes, I mean, I take it home and skin it and do all the things that you need to do to get it ready to cook it on a meal. I mean, that's the second half of all the fun.
Yeah, I learned we were mentioning different tactics like for actually fishing, what kind of lures to use and how to cast properly, and what time of day and all these other little tips and tricks you can learn. But I remember when I was very young, maybe 12 or 13, I got the treatment of how to clean and fillet the fish properly. It's like, oh, what kind of knife do you use and what kind of cut do you use, and what's the proper way to process the fish and all that good stuff. So there's tips and tricks you can learn for that as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I learned that sort of play by the trial by fire. Either you get sick or you don't. Because I did a lot of like JROTC in high school, and they sent us out into like the woods for a weekend, and they were like, "All right, here's the fish that we're gonna give you, and you're gonna have to fillet it and everything yourselves. And we're not really gonna give you too much instruction. So hope already how to do this." So that was a learn and keep that in, keep those methods with you, because obviously you didn't get sick, so you must have done a good enough job.
Mm. Yeah, this is actually an interesting comment in chat here. Stone Hat, fishing seems like a peaceful solo activity, but how do you learn if you don't have a fisherman to teach you? How would you guys respond to that? Time Stealer, we'll go to you first.
That is a very good question, and it does sort of loop back around to what we were saying about it being passed down by male relatives. If you don't have, I mean, there's quite a lot of young lads whose dad just isn't around, unfortunately. And if you don't have any friends who do it, it can be very difficult. It can be quite intimidating. At least in the UK, there's like tackle shops pretty much everywhere. If you go in and ask them, where's a good place to start fishing, and they usually sell sort of fairly. Usually, a tackle shop, they'll sell you not like just the basic gear you need. Like not there's a lot of sort of rubbish sort of gear like starter kits around, but a good tackle shop will sell you decent gear that you need. And then thankfully these days there's, at least for UK fishing, there's tons of YouTube, and there's different magazines and stuff that you can read, and you can pick up a lot of stuff, and books as well. There's tons of books in the UK. What was one? There was one in the UK called the Haynes Coarse Fishing Manual, but just goes over all the basic stuff, and then a lot of it is trial and error. The best thing to do is to try and go somewhere where there's lots of small fish, and you can just buy like a little 4-meter whip, just get a ready-made rig and tie that on, and buy a couple of pint of maggots, and flick that out, and you'll catch some little roach and stuff. I would say a mixture of YouTube and publications. If you don't have anyone who can actually teach you in person.
Yeah, all very good advice. Prudentialist, anything to add?
Well, I don't know where you live, Stone Hat, but I mean, Time Stealer's advice is pretty good. I mean, if you live in America, I would always try and find your local rod and gun club, because those guys are probably going to be people who are already in the know if they go there and have memberships, whether they're hunters or fishermen. And, if they've got stuff available to you, then go for it. But he says that his next door neighbor has 8 massive fishing pools. I've never could literally fish out of my kitchen one. Well, I mean, then, if that's the case, I mean, talk to your neighbor.
Yeah.
I mean, the cool thing I've learned about, and I don't know where you live, but I mean, the thing about fishing, especially out where I live in the country, like it's one of the last few places. Okay, he lives in England, so Time Stealer's advice works best. But I mean, even then, right? It's one of those fishing is one of those activities where there's still like that high trust society where you can ask someone a question and it's not like you're going after them or what's the angle or what's the catch, so to speak. And so just talking to people in a way that, I want to get into this. Where do I start? You're going to be pretty surprised at how welcoming people are to this habit. And it is peaceful, and it's a great solo activity where, you can waste 8 hours and not do anything but fish, even if you don't get a catch.
Yeah.
I will say, sorry, can I just say that if you're in England, you do need to be a little bit more careful, because most places, the rights to fish there are owned by clubs or individual or whatever. So you do have to be a little bit more careful than in America, in England, when it comes to fishing, because you don't want to get told off for fishing somewhere you're not supposed to be fishing. But yeah, if they belong to your neighbor, and he hasn't leased the rights out to any club or individuals or whatever, just ask them and say what kind of fish are in there. And once you know what kind of fish are in there, you can just go on Google and type in how to catch roach or whatever, and turn on your autism and absorb the information, really. And you just go down to tackle shop and for example, just say, look, there's these pools at the back of my house, and it's I've been told they're full of roach and perch and whatever, and can I just have some basic gear? And like I said, they'll probably sell you like a little starter whip or something and some maggots, and you can get pre-tied rigs, and it's pretty simple, really.
Yeah, you'll definitely find this theme going through any outdoor recreational activity, especially here in America, because it really is like so ingrained into our culture that, especially with older men as well, that because so few people are actually like actively getting into these kinds of sports, they are dying to some extent. People are just going to be so ecstatic seeing somebody else want to get into these spaces. If you're passionate about something, you just want to teach more people about it. So if you go into one of these places where these older men gather, or even people your own age or your neighbor in your case, and you just go in there and you genuinely want to learn about these things, people will gladly share their information with you, share their techniques, everything. I mean, just like us talking right now, I mean, we enjoy talking about this subject. Whenever somebody comes up to me and asks me about fishing or hunting or everything, I just always want to talk about it. So you don't really need to pry information out of people with these kinds of things if you're new to it.
Yeah, fishermen are legendary for the fact that you can't shut them up once they get going about fishing. It's well known. It's well known. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. But yeah, that is it definitely is something that we definitely need to encourage more guys to be part of. I mean, I mentioned it earlier in the stream, but the closest I personally have ever felt to any like sense of the divine has absolutely been when I'm out in the woods or I'm out in the lake or on the stream. I just love the ambiance of it. Like it's quiet. You don't have to deal with social media, your cell phone, or anybody else yelling at you, or the bustling of a city or something like that. You can just hear the wind in the trees and the water and everything like that, and it really just is a spiritual experience. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said it's possibly in decline a bit because in America, because here in the UK, it's still extremely popular. Fishing's very, very popular. There's tackle trade's doing pretty well. A lot of it's online these days, but there's the companies that sell the tackle are still doing extremely well. There's fisheries all over the place.
Yeah.
I think it's dependent on where you live
Yeah.
in the United States, because I mean, like I'd said, like I live in the country, and like every local gas station that I go to that's not a big franchise gas station or whatever, they're selling fish and tackle, alongside snacks and stuff that you would need for your car, and it's just part of where I live, and it's still quite alive. And I mean, America, I don't know what it's like in the UK at all, but here in America, it's also in the same way. It's kind of got that like NASCAR commodity vibe. Like there's the big, Bassmaster Classic where you get to see all of like the sponsored fishing greats kind of go and gather around. And to me, it's really cool just the fact that there is so much outdoors, television and products oriented around it. We have Lord knows how many kind of sporting goods stores for hunting and fishing and other kinds of gear that you might need to be outside camping and such. Like, I think it's still very much alive in America. I think that the Zach Frisbee's comment in the chat about proximity to water being a big thing too. Like, it just depends. Like, if you're, 440 miles away or, 100 miles away from a lake or the nearest river, then it might play a different role. But I think it's really alive here in America.
Yeah, that's probably a difference with the UK is that everyone's near water because we've got rivers, you've got the canals that were dug a couple of hundred years ago, you've got reservoirs that were dug, you've got pits that were dug for gravel and extraction of minerals that then fill with water. You've got naturally occurring ponds, you've got naturally occurring lakes, and then you've got purposely dug fisheries where like a farmer will dig these ponds and stock them with fish and people will pay to fish them. So there's places to fish everywhere. I mean, there's multiple places that I could go fishing within like 5-10 minute walk of where I live, like it's everywhere. So it's probably one of the reasons why it's so ubiquitous amongst people here is that it's actually really easy to find places to fish.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with the fact that, like, if you are going to get into one of these outdoor sports, fishing is by far like the lowest barrier to entry. Like hunting, I mean, number one, it's more dangerous, because you're actually using like live firearms and stuff like that, so there's a barrier to entry there. And then also, just different kinds of techniques, and it also requires slightly, different kind of set of a different mindset to an extent because, you're shooting, a cute little deer or something like that, as opposed to, just catching a bass in the stream and stuff like that. But yeah, fishing, you can definitely get into with, little effort. And also you're not going to break the bank either. I mean, you can definitely get down the rabbit holes of, having, your $25 Rapala lures or something like that, but if you do it efficiently, it's definitely, a sport for the everyman.
Oh yeah, you can in this country you can really get carried away with your gear that you buy. We have this phrase called people tackle tarts, which is basically someone who just buys like all new fancy fishing tackle. And I have been guilty of this on occasion, but I am nowhere near as bad as some people. Carp fishing especially is bad for this. Carp fishing, there's this concept of what we call the carp tax, which is basically where you take an item that, like what we call a bivvy, which is basically a tent or like a Calor gas stove or a lot of camping type stuff. But then when it's made by a carp fishing tackle manufacturer, it's got their name plastered over it and it's painted green, it suddenly costs like an extra 30% of what it would cost to get a basic pitch version from an outdoor shop. Yeah, it can get out of hand. But on the other hand, I literally, if I go for a walk down the canal, which I do all the time because I live near it, I'll see some lads with like I said, going all the way back with like a little whip that they bought from the tackle shop and a ready tied radio and a few maggots or a bit of bread. And they'll be pulling out little roach, or if they got a maggot or a little worm on, pulling out little perch, and just I have a chat with them and say, "How you doing?" and blah blah blah. And it's just that's only cost them, like 40 quid. And it's literally you can spend 40 quid and get going. Or I'm sure there's people who have probably over the course of few years, they might spend £40,000 on fishing gear, and even buy a van to put it in, or they might be part of a syndicate and club memberships. And yeah, it's such a variable. It is the kind of it's only as expensive as you make it. Really, fishing. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, like it was said earlier, it's a low cost of entry, but the skill cap is basically endless. And really, it can be enjoyable for anybody. I mean, it takes time, I think, especially if you've never done it before, to get into it, because, there is you're out there, you're waiting. It's not going to be instantaneous. The comparison I've heard a lot sometimes, at least in America, is that fishing is a lot like baseball. There's going to be a lot of moments in between where there is not a lot of action, but when it does happen, it's just the greatest kind of rush that you can get. Oh, yeah. And, it is pretty cheap here in America, too. I mean, yeah, there are some brands out there that everyone's going to tell you what the top quality is. But, I mean, there's probably enough American and UK fish blogs that are going to tell you what to go for and what's affordable and accessible. I mean, there's pretty good stuff, actually, here in America that you can pick up at a Walmart and not break the bank whatsoever to just enjoy your time going to a stream or a lake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also America has done a fantastic job of maintaining a lot of our wildlands. If anyone's familiar with it's called the Pickman-Robertson Act, and it was passed during the Teddy Roosevelt administration. That basically all of the hunting supplies, bullets, rifles, fishing rods, lures, all these kinds of things, they all have a tax associated with them, and that tax goes to maintaining our national parks and public land. I mean, America has more public land than anywhere else on the planet, and it really does show. Your tax dollars pay for it, so you can literally just go on the state land, get yourself a $20 fishing license, and you have access to it. It's yours.
It's funny. It's the complete opposite here. Most of the fishing rights, I think I sort of said this earlier, are privately owned. And to be honest, that's not really a problem, because when you go and fish on places that are publicly owned, that they don't tend to be very well looked after. We tend to have more of a problem with poaching. Coarse fish here and most species of fish, we don't eat them, partially because they don't taste very nice, and also because if there's overpopulated as an island, so if everyone started eating them, there'd be very low levels of stocks. But in a private fishery, that's not a problem, because there's people keeping that. Someone in the chat said tragedy of the commons, and yeah, I see that on my local river, where there's a stretch that's owned by the local council, and there's litter everywhere. There's like Eastern Europeans always poaching, and then when you go on the stretches where the rights are owned by a club and it's a farmer that owns the land, there's a lot less litter. The fish are in better condition. It's the complete opposite here. So it's interesting that you say that, actually, because I wish it was more like that here. But really, here it's the private owners that take the best care of the waters.
Yeah, you kind of get both of them in these cases. There definitely are incidences where there've been some severe problems, especially in like the urban areas, like on the Great Lakes region, where there's been a lot of pollution and such like that. But America has done a fantastic job by and large of maintaining most of our wilderness, partially because we're such a massive country, and a lot of our people are, spread out. You go out somewhere like to Wyoming or Colorado, and the whole state population isn't as big as, the whole city of New York City, so there's, bunches of wild land and forests and ponds and woods, and you go somewhere in like the mountains of Montana, and it's not implausible that you would hike up into the mountains and you would find a stream that has been fished in many years.
Yeah, it's not really like that here so much. But you can still find those rare places because, like I said, there is just so much water here where the fish have never been caught. That does still exist, but it's nowhere near like it is in America.
Yeah, we really are blessed in that regard. I mean, even if you just a day pass for certain lakes or whatnot really does make a world of difference on what's accessible to you, depending on where you drive. But I the other big thing that I also enjoy about fishing is that you don't have to stay in one place all day. If they're not biting here, you can walk further down the stream or walk around the lake or pond or whatever and try out a new spot. It's not as permanently stuck in one place as people think. It's not a stationary sit on your butt kind of job. It's definitely the kind of thing where you can get up and move around and think about where it is. And plus you get to learn the lay of the water that you're dealing with, whether there's a lot of algae or, seaweed over on this part of the lake, or well, that part's really clear, or this part's got the sunlight, so you can get a better glimpse of where the fish are going to be because it's the heat and they want to rise up to it. It's just a lot of good ways to really learn and appreciate your local geography as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely have more, I guess we would call it more control over the situation than you would in a sport like hunting. Like you're sitting at a deer stand and it really just is, waiting and a lot of luck. Not to say there isn't luck involved with fishing, but you could definitely, just pick up and move to a different spot, even on the same stretch of water or something like that, if you think it's not working well for you. So, eh, just like anything else, though, practice makes perfect. There's definitely like muscle memory you learn, like, when you're holding your rod and, everybody's got their own technique of like where they like to, put their thumb. Some people like to put it on the line to actually like feel, the movements and everything like that. So, there's muscle memory involved and you'll develop your own technique. But yeah, there's just a great depth of knowledge in this sport, and you can, and it's something you do for a lifetime.
Yeah, the sheer levels of autism that are involved when it comes to, I suppose what Americans would just call bait fishing. In the UK, like almost all fishing is bait fishing. Lure fishing is a bit more popular, than it used to be. But we have got it down to just a level of artistry and finesse that Americans would find almost ridiculous. But that's the lens you have to go to because the fish can be quite hard to catch.
Yeah, well, they've been fished for 1,000 years by your people, so
yeah, exactly. A lot of the fish have been caught before and put back. To the bigger ones, anyway. There's a particular species of fish called the chub. It's primarily a river fish, and it's sort of like the human equivalent of a fish because it's not physically particularly exceptional, and it's not like a shoal fish either. Well, they will go in shoals, but it's not a proper shoal fish. They're just very intelligent by fish standards, and they are like legendarily crafty to catch. Very, very crafty, hard to catch. And yeah, like you could spend your entire life just trying to really get good at catching just chub alone on different rivers and stuff. And learning all the different baits and what to use at time of year and how to present it, and it's endless. It's utterly endless.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, the difference, lures and bait fishing. I mean, I'm definitely more of a lure fisher myself, just with knowing the seasons and when to use, say, something like a top water or when to use a beetle spin, depending on what kind of lake or pond or wherever you're at. I mean, live bait's always great, especially with, night crawlers and things like that. But I would have never had considered that there might be a difference. Just I realized now that you said that I'm definitely more of a lure guy than bait.
Yeah, I'm generally more live fisher. Yeah, live bait myself as well.
Yeah, the fish here are nowhere near as predatory as in America. We only really have a couple of species of fish that will actually take lures. The vast majority is bait fishing. Baits like worms, maggots are probably the most popular bait because you can use them as a hook bait and a feed. You can feed them. You can put them in the water. That's something else you don't do in America. I found that it's actually illegal to loose feed. Essentially, you call it chumming.
Yeah, there's a lot of regulations for that. Yeah,
it is massive here. Like people will put in like kilos full of ground bait and like bags full of boilies and maggots and stuff. And like bread's a popular bait. Bread's one of my favorite baits. Chub love a big bit of bread or pellets as well. Pellets are very popular. Endless.
One of the reasons they don't really like chumming over here is because of our climate over here in the States. A lot of our lakes that are not just fishing are also used for recreational, like swimming and water sports and stuff like that.
Ah,
I know you guys in the UK, you have a little bit colder water, but
yeah.
yeah, so people don't really want, gross, fish guts and, chum and stuff in their, public lakes. But yeah, we also have different kinds of, fish over here, like you were mentioning. So yeah, lures will definitely carry you a lot further over here, depending on what you're after. What about flies? You guys into fly fishing?
Yeah, I don't really do it. It's not my cup of tea, but I'm in a member of a club on a river where like a lot of the anglers fly fish for trout. I find trout kind of a pain in the arse because they're very aggressive,
Yeah.
and if you hook one, they'll often scare off the fish you're actually trying to catch.
Mhm.
And I'm sure they're great fun to catch on the fly, but like they love maggots, and so when you're trying to catch like chorb or roach or dace using maggots underneath a float, and you're very carefully presenting it and you're running it through with the current, and then some trout just takes it and it just goes absolutely ballistic and it scares off all the other fish. It's a pain in the ass. But fly fishing, it's not as popular as it used to be. It's mostly kind of a sport done by sort of middle-aged or older men now. It's not. Yeah, I think it's just the younger lads. They more want to do carp fishing. They want to catch carp rather than game fish.
Yeah, that's definitely, observation I've made that like fly fishing isn't as popular as it used to be, but it also entirely depends on where you are and what you're catching. Like if you're on like a trout stream or a salmon run or something like that. What do you think, Brood?
Well, I haven't really gone fly fishing. It's on my list of things that I really want to do. Recently, in a book club I'm in, we've been reading The River Runs Through It, and I would love to get into that kind of wild trout fishing sort of deal. It's not something that I get a lot of exposure to here in Texas, but it's on those things that I just want to do.
Mm. Yeah, speaking of books about fishing, I've been meaning to reread Old Man and the Sea. I remember I read it maybe a decade ago, but I've been meaning to reread it after the last time I read it, I hadn't done like saltwater fishing yet, and now since I have done it, it's something I'd like to revisit. I remember Hemingway did a very good job with that book.
Yeah, I think I read it about 20 years ago, and I still remember bits of it. It's kind of the classic fisherman anglers book, isn't it? Really,
Mm.
it's a great story.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Hemingway was a very masculine man as well. Him and Teddy Roosevelt are some of my favorite people to read. Great outdoorsmen, both of them. Big hunters, big anglers, both of them. So, um, yeah. All right. Let's wrap this up, guys. This was a fantastic conversation, and definitely everyone in the chat, go get into fishing. You absolutely will not regret it. It's a skill you can have for the rest of your life. In all aspects of it, from either the friendships and the masculine energy between you and family members, the sense of accomplishment and pride when you hone your craft, the wonderful food you can provide for yourself and your family, just everything all across the board. You definitely need to get into this sport. Any closing thoughts, guys?
We'll just go fishing. Fishing is love. Fishing is life.
Awesome. All right. Time Stealer, anything you want to show, man?
No, I am thinking of maybe getting back into making some YouTube videos and doing some streams of my own. But for now, just subscribe and channel. Follow me on Twitter. I'm getting close to 1,000 followers on Twitter, so I'm trying to pump those numbers up. But other than that, yeah, just take the fishing pill and just get out there, touch some grass, people. Please, I'm begging you.
Yeah, good advice. Prude, anything you want to show, man?
Well, to keep us on topic, about a month or so back, I had a stream with the man himself, Morgoth, talking about fishing. So if you want to get a little more of that, head over to my channel and just look up that fishing stream with Morgoth. You won't be disappointed.
All right, cool. And for me, I'll just shill again, Man's Hour, Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. And I'm going to get back into writing more on my Substack here now that winter and fall are coming. So I've got like 4 articles that are like half written right now, and I got to figure out which one I want to publish next. But be on the lookout for that. And then of course follow me on Twitter. But thanks for coming on, guys, and we'll talk to you next time.
Pleasure to be here.